back over in better condition than I got it.
Yeah, that's fine. There we go.
All right, I'm going to call the September 15th business meeting of Borough Council to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Are we with the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Mr. Brown, will you call the roll?
Absolutely. Council President Fred Bush.
Here.
Council Vice President Michelle Panopoulos. Council Member Barbara Fortner.
Here.
Council Member Rob McGreevy.
Here.
Council Member Cindy Rickards.
Here.
Council Member Bob Weisbord.
Here.
Council Member Ira Winston.
Here.
Mayor Andrea Deutsch.
Here.
All right. I will now entertain any agenda additions or changes. In particular, I would entertain a motion to add a discussion of green building standards as 8B, be presented by Todd Bressi.
So moved.
Is there a second for that motion? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor of amending the agenda to add green building to 8B? We're voting now. All those in favor? All right, motion passes. Are there agenda additions or changes?
There's going to be a little adjustment to the mayor's report.
Okay, I don't think we need to, we need to make an official change. All right, let's move on to President's comments. So first of all, so we're still in moderate transmission, so masks are required at the meeting, but I have decided that people who are speaking can take their masks off while they're speaking. I've heard a lot of concerns by people who are having trouble hearing in this room, particularly online. So I'm going to announce a change in the Infrastructure Committee. So the new chair of the Infrastructure Committee will be Ira Winston, and the new vice chair of Infrastructure will be Michelle Panopoulos. Councilmember Panopoulos has a new job with a lot of new new responsibilities and massive amounts of time required. So she's stepping back from some of her council responsibilities, although not the vice presidency at this time. And she's right now onboarding. So congratulations, Michelle. And when you hear this, hope you're having fun. In addition, this is in the Borough Manager's report, but I'm going to echo it as well. We received a grant to help us to purchase the property at 3 Elmwood. Much of the green space at 3 Elmwood in order to preserve it as a public green space for the community. I'm really excited about this because it helps us fulfill a lot of comprehensive plan goals. It fits in with a lot of community desires that we heard expressed over the development process. And it furthers our commitment to work through the grant process to try to save money for the borough as much as possible while we're engaging in these projects. So I'm really excited that we got this grant. There is still some opportunities down the line to try to leverage that grant to see if we can receive even more money to assist the borough in the purchase, but it means that the purchase is going to go forward, and very pleased with that. All right, let's move on to the mayor's report.
Thank you. Just briefly, I just want to remind everybody, school is now back in session. Buses are amongst us in the morning, picking up, and in the afternoon, dropping off. It is the rule that if they have their lights on and their signs out, you must stop. That is for protection of our kids. And so just everyone, please obey that rule and make sure you stop. If you don't stop and you get caught, it is a massive fine that you do not want. So it's in everybody's interest to follow the rule. You're not going to get where you're going that much faster by failing to stop. So please do that. Secondly, a little bit more somber note. I want to send our thoughts and our best wishes to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. There were 3 sheriffs, 3 members of their department who were injured this morning in a bomb training exercise when a bomb unexpectedly exploded. So we're sending our best to them and hoping that everyone has a speedy and full recovery. And that is it.
I want to talk about that.
Oh, we had a presentation that was originally scheduled for tonight. Some people couldn't attend, so that is postponed for another month.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you.
Let's move on to public comment. Start in the room. Do you wish to make a public comment? All right. Ms. Bryant?
All right, so anyone on Zoom who would like to make a public comment, please either use the raise hand function or literally raise your hand and I will call on you. All right, and I see here Michael Galdini. You see a prompt to ask. There you go. You got it.
Prompt. Okay. Council President, Vice President, Council members, Mike Galdini, 418 Conway. I'm here today to ask that any considerations for option 4 for Sabine Avenue include an affordable housing component and for people of all ages. I emailed council a few weeks ago on this topic, outlining why I believe that affordable housing is a critical need for the borough and why option 4 provides a unique opportunity to make some real progress on that need. And the email was more data centric, but today I kind of wanted to more so focus on why this matters to me personally. My grandparents moved to Narberth in 1950. Before that, they were Italian immigrants living in West Philly. My papa was a tailor. My mom was a hairdresser. In 1950, they were able to buy a row home in the Italian section of Narberth for $6,000, which where they could both live and work. Ran the tailor shop out the front, allowed them to save on rent for the former storefront. And so for reference today, that would be akin to finding a place in Narberth for somewhere in the upper 100s to mid 200s. And that sort of affordable home was a pathway into a close-knit, walkable, vibrant community. And Narberth has provided spaces for folks of different means and backgrounds. And, you know, in doing so, my understanding over the years, other places called us Hungry Town, Armpit of the Main Line, that type of stuff. But the socioeconomic diversity that came with Narberth, in my opinion, has been foundational for this community. And like I said in my email, we've seen some major socioeconomic shifts. And I think it's incumbent on us as a matter of public policy to continue to try to find opportunities for affordable spaces for working families. And that's a community benefit. I would say that's actually core to who we are as a community. And so, you know, you've partnered with the Redevelopment Authority on the RFP. They're working on drafting it, is my understanding. And so I would say the next critical step on that option 4 version is for y'all to make sure that you review the RFP and specifically any associated scoring matrices that are associated with that RFP. To ensure that affordable housing is included on that and to ensure that it would score in a way that you would get the responses you want to see and that it would be included as a component, because that document and any associated scoring with it is what's actually going to make these values actionable and deliverable as a matter of public policy and would guide the types of responses we see and the outcomes that we get. So that would be my ask. Thank you to the council. A number of y'all responded to my email, and I really, really deeply appreciate the responses and the fact that you read my comment. And so I just wanted to follow up and attend this meeting. Thank you all, and make that ask regarding review of the RFP. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardini.
All right. Would anyone else like to make public comment tonight? All right. I see no further comment on Zoom.
All right. Let's move on to 8A, PFM presentation for line of credit proposal.
Sure. So with us here tonight, we have Zach Roller from PFM. I'm going to make him a co-host so he can unmute himself and so he can share his screen as needed to share the proposal and information he has here with us tonight. Zach, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for allowing me to zoom in. I appreciate that. So let me share. And so tell me what you can see, Samantha. Do you have is there like a screen or does everyone have the handout?
So we have the screen. The presentation was included digitally to council in their packet, but we also see it up on the screen now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just to take a quick step back, I think the last time that I saw you was back in December when we were talking about refinancing some of your existing debt. We borrowed a little bit of new capital for some projects, and we completed that, all in the kind of December to close in January timeframe. We were able to get extremely low interest rates, which was pretty awesome because the debt that we refinanced was already at a very low rate. So what I'm kind of leading into is the market has changed a lot since then. So if you look at the bottom chart here, this is the 10-year tax exempt rate. So it's kind of a benchmark in the tax exempt world, which is how, Narberth and other boroughs and municipalities can borrow. If you look back in December where my mouse is moving around, that was kind of about when we borrowed the money. And you can see those were at basically all-time low rates. Rates have come up significantly since then, and I'm sure everyone's heard about the Fed increasing the overnight rate and inflation and supply chain issues and just kind of all the messes that we currently have. That's led to a very sharp increase in rates. So if you kind of look at this middle chart, this chart goes back to the early 90s. And you can see this sharp increase was, really just as bad as back in 08 with the financial crisis. So rates have come off of the lows at very fast levels. The actual overall level of interest rates is kind of back in a more normal range. It's just not the all-time lows anymore, but it's just been a very quick rise to that. So it was good that we got everything that we did done back in December. And if you do decide to borrow money, in the current environment, there's always the chance and, probably the likelihood that in a few years you could come back and refinance it for, lower interest rates. So just kind of keep that in mind. So that's the quick market update. Here, I'm not going to read all these bullets. Let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. But just as some background as to what we're going to show you. So Samantha had contacted us to put together some options. There's more than what we're going to show you, but we just wanted to keep it relatively simple to get you in the ballpark of what something might look like if you were to do this. So under A, we're talking about borrowing of up to $1.5 million. Now, it's our understanding that this money, may be needed, it may not be needed, and it may take about up to 24 months to really know whether you're going to need it or not for borough capital improvements. So when you look at
Zach, if I can just sorry to interrupt you, I want to provide a little bit of context for the public and for council as well. So what we're trying to do here, infrastructure committee talked about this, where while we're doing capital improvements right now to our facilities, if we were to suffer some sort of, catastrophic repair need, the borough does not have the money on hand to handle that, whether it's 100 Conway, whether it's 201 Sabine, whether it's 80 Windsor. So the purpose of this money would be to have effectively a line of credit available to us to handle any emergency situation like that. And the debt ordinance that we would have to do would specify that usage and the limit of that usage for that purpose.
Yep, no, that's helpful kind of intro. So given what Samantha just said, when you look under Roman numeral 1, we would be asking the banks to give us an extended draw period. And what that means is you would go through with the financing, you'd lock in an interest rate on the debt, but you wouldn't actually be paying debt service on the debt. You wouldn't be paying interest on the debt because you wouldn't have drawn it yet. And then as you draw on the debt in the form of a line of credit, then you would start to pay. So if 16 months from now you needed $500,000 to fix the roof or something, at that point you would take $500,000 out of the line of credit. you would then be paying debt service on that 500,000. So it's meant to be flexible for kind of what is unknown. Okay. So that's a positive to the borough. The banks don't love that type of loan because in the bank's eyes, they could potentially kind of go through this and they'll have money on the books, that they've loaned Narberth $1.5 million, but you're not actually making any payments to them. So they're not making any money on it. Right. So because of that situation, sometimes they have what's called an undrawn balance fee, or they could require some type of deposit relationship, meaning that they would say, we will do this, but we want, you have to keep a minimum of $500,000 at our bank or something. We'd have to see what people want. So it's a little bit of it's a very beneficial feature to have for the borough, but it may come at some sort of a cost. So what we would go through that and we, negotiate with the banks. We have this structured right now as a 10-year repayment period. Again, the reason for that is to keep it interesting for the banks. The longer you go out on the yield curve with banks, the less likely they are to give you a loan or to give you a fixed rate for the loan. And especially if we're already asking for a 24-month draw facility or something like that, it'll be beneficial to hopefully, keep this at about 10 years. So that's the first piece of this. So that's for $1.5 million. So then if you go to B, here we're talking about a $1.1 million loan for potential open space funding. Now, it's our understanding that you've applied for a DCNR grant, but you might not have that in time based on when you need the money. So what you could do is you can borrow the $1.1 million, start the process of the project. And then when the grant funding is received, then you can make a prepayment on the loan. So it kind of keeps everything moving, but still leaves it flexible enough that you can take advantage of the grant money. Again, this is, not the bank's favorite because they're going to put up 1.1 million and then, 6 months from now or 12 months from now, you're going to come back and pay off half of it. So again, we're keeping this to a similar 10-year repayment period. And we can discuss that can be a little bit longer if we want to. But for now, that's what our thought process was in order to keep the banks interested. And, similar to what we talked about before, they may want some type of depository relationship, which we can work through with Samantha, what would be most beneficial for the borough to do. So we're going to show you some numbers of what this actually looks like on a budgetary basis, but this is what we modeled up as a first step in this process. So Samantha, is there anything to add there that I missed?
No, I think you did a great job of covering that, Zach. Thank you.
Sure. And then so the next steps would be, we don't need anything tonight. I think this is just informational. But when if you decide to move forward and when you're ready to, you would just authorize the financing team to proceed like you did last year. Then we would work on an RFP. We'd run a process with some banks. I think the distribution of this RFP would be to a smaller universe of banks so we can make it a little bit more of a personal process because we are asking for kind of some things that they're not necessarily going to love. So rather than just winging out an RFP to the 40 banks across Pennsylvania, we'll choose the ones that responded last time and some other ones that have been very active in the market lately. And, we'll likely call them and talk to them and kind of have a more kind of intimate process in order to hopefully get the best results. So I think that's the plan. So if we flip to the next page, before we get into what the new numbers might look like, this is a snapshot of your old debt, your existing debt. So if you do nothing, your debt looks like this page in column 8. So columns 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are all the things that you had before that are either paid off or about to be paid off in calendar year 2022. Okay, so that's why they're on there. So next year, those will all be gone. And you'll be left with column 6 and 7. Those are the pieces that we refunded back in December to close in January. And so your debt service runs level starting in 2024 at about $170,000, let's call it, annually. Okay. And then down below in footnotes 4 and 5, it shows what the rates are. We're assuming these at the maximum cap rate. So it's kind of the worst case scenario is, always how we tell people to budget going forward. So hopefully you can do better than that 170,000 over the, coming years. Any questions about the existing debt? Okay. All right. So then this is the summary page for what we just talked about on the bullets. Okay. So start in column 6 and 7, that's your existing debt again. See that about 170,000. So that's where you are today. And then if you look in columns 1 and 8 in the blue, that's showing $1.5 million borrowing over a 10-year period at a fixed rate of 3.25%. That's, about what we're seeing in the market right now. We might do better. We might do worse in the RFP, but that's, a good ballpark number. And what this shows is if you had that full $1.5 million drawn immediately, which we know is not the case, your payments would start, in 2023, and then you'd have about $194,000 payment over the next 10 years. Okay. So let's just say you drew half of that money, you drew $750,000, you could basically kind of cut that payment in half. Okay. And again, we can run different versions of how much you draw just so you can see what it means to the budget. But that gets you in the ballpark. All right. Now, as I said, the rates aren't the lowest right now. If we locked in a 325 today, there's a chance that a few years from now, even next year, potentially, we could come back, we could refinance the debt, we could stretch the debt out in order to lower the payments. So instead of a 10-year repayment period, we could push it out to 15 years, for example. So, the debt is flexible and you have different moves, but this would kind of be the starting spot, I think. That makes sense? So then what we're showing you in the red in columns 2 and 9 is that $1.1 million open space loan. Again, this assumes a full draw with no grant money. So this would be the worst case scenario. And over that 10-year period, you're looking at about $142,000, let's call it. So then when all the dust settles and you have all this whole $2.6 million outstanding all at once, column 10 would show where you'd have to get in your budget. So you would have to get up to about a $500,000 number in the 24 budget year. All right. Now, again, that's the worst case scenario. That's probably, not likely to happen given what we know, but that's kind of the base case that we want to show you. So now if we look in columns 4 and 11, in this scenario, this is the open space with only a partial draw, or you use the grant money to pay down half of it. So it basically takes column 9 and breaks it down to column 11. So it's about half the cost, which I think is more in line with what you would expect on the open space portion. Okay, so that would be about a $70,000, $71,000 payment each year going forward. And again, you would have the same ability to refinance it, to restructure it and stretch it out if the payment is too high, that you determine that in the future. But that's approximately what it would look like. And then column 12 is adding column 11 and column 8 together along with your existing debt. So it's just the partial draw or the pay down of the grant monies in column 12. So I think that's what we prepared for tonight, to kind of just get some numbers on paper so you can see how it would impact the budget based on the full draw or half of the open space money. If you need to see some more options where we show you half of the $1.5 million, you only draw half of it, plus a smaller portion of the open space money. Again, there's different versions of this that we can show you, but we thought this was a good starting spot. So Samantha, feel free to jump in if you want to clarify anything or.
I thought that was great. So I welcome any questions or comments council has.
Members of council, anybody wish to ask questions? All right.
Okay. Well, hopefully that was helpful. We'll kind of wait to hear from Samantha on, if we need some new scenarios or what the plan is, and then we'll be ready to help when you're ready.
All
right. Thanks.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
I'll be in touch tomorrow or early next week.
Yeah, so
Okay.
does anybody object to moving forward with gathering information about this? Are you ready to move on with the?
Yeah, I think we should probably, and definitely with the timing of the agreement of sale for the 3 Elmwood property, we probably need to get that financing in place sooner than later. And again, like Zach said, with the draw facility, that would only be emergency kind of use if needed. So, I mean, unless anyone has any major objection, I actually would like to go ahead and authorize PFM to, start this RFP process. And my kind of gut instinct actually would be, depending on what the banks want to do, and Zach, you'll be able to sort this out, but I am kind of thinking it might be cleaner just for the borough to try and only borrow the $550 for the open space, as opposed to borrowing the $1.1 million and then making the large prepayment. But you'll know as well what the banks will be more interested in.
So if you're saying to move forward and start the process, are we talking about both options or just both of them? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think I'll be right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to see what it's going to cost to have that option for the larger loan. But,
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and especially given, you should, as I've kind of joked with you before, I had a professor who works at PFM who told me repeatedly not to try and guess where interest rates are going, but I think the Fed has literally told us that interest rates are going to be going up, so sooner might be better in that regard as well.
all right. Does anyone on council object to moving forward with the RFP? Okay, great.
Okay, sounds good. We'll get started. Samantha, we'll put a timeline together so we can see how this, plays out over the next 60 days, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Zach.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. 8B, green building standards. Mr. Todd Brescia has just walked in a few minutes ago, so. Okay. And if you want to take off your mask to talk to us, that's fine.
Okay, I'd like to do that. Thank you. Thanks for making time on your agenda tonight for this last minute update. I think you all know we've been working for a few months on responding to requests from council and others that we figure out a way to include green building standards as a zoning bonus approach. I think we came here in the summer with a framework for doing that. We received some very useful feedback from the Environmental Advisory Commission that kind of directed us a little bit, focused us a little bit. So based on the feedback we received from them, we revised that framework, discussed it at the Planning Commission on Monday, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you what that framework looks like and where we hope we can head with. The main I think takeaway from the Environmental Advisory Commission's input to us was that we really ought to try to focus the green building bonus to the borough's other goals for carbon neutrality. I might not use these words exactly right. I spent a lot of time trying to pin them down, and that we focus really on the idea net zero building. There were some other issues we talked about, but that linkage with that policy and focus on that outcome seemed to be what the Environmental Advisory Council was suggesting. That was super useful. So there might be other things that we would leave off the agenda for the time being. So I had to do some research on this. What's this mean? And it was very helpful because we think that we can focus on three main aspects of development applications to help achieve this goal. One is to find ways of asking applicants to reduce their carbon inputs into their construction processes. Second, asking them to maximize the energy efficiency of their new buildings. And third, to source power from on-site renewable sources or from renewable energy providers, or ultimately from the community sourcing that the borough is investigating, if that comes into play. And so I guess the first question I hope that council can provide feedback on is that the right set of issues to be focusing on? Is that the right approach to take? So that's one thing hopefully you can think about and help us with. To accomplish that, then, we would need to establish metrics, goals, performance standards of some sort for each of those three things that we could then evaluate an application against. Say, yes, you've done what is necessary to qualify, or no, you need to do something else. So in terms of reducing carbon inputs in the construction process, so to do that, we've actually begun reviewing other zoning codes to see how they do this in other cities. And amazingly, there are some cities that actually are moving to the point of requiring buildings to be net zero, not just the bonus, but moving that way, even in California, which is surprising because they have issues with housing. So we've been able to pull that into our research. We've not yet found a workable metric for how to evaluate reducing carbon inputs into construction processes. Fred and I and the commission members have been exchanging emails, and there may be ways to do that simply by asking applicants to indicate from a menu of options which actions they will take to do that, such as recycling a certain percentage of their waste rather than just disposing of it, or sourcing certain kinds of materials that are recycled, so we could identify a list of things. Second, in terms of maximizing energy efficiency of new buildings, we think that could be possible by finding, since the borough is limited in how it can adjust its building code and apply it to all development, there are kind of alternative energy efficiency codes. Not LEED, because that's very complicated and cumbersome, but other kinds of alternative energy efficiency codes. I'm going to read you things that I don't even understand, but Energy Star, the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, ASHRAE 90.1-2019. And I need to pause there and say Jen Heon, who's watching on Zoom, planning commissioner, did this research that I'm talking about. So thank you, Jen, for helping us get here. So what we could say is meet those standards in that code, and that is easily evaluated just like you would evaluate any other building code. And then third, sourcing power from on-site renewable sources seems to be pretty straightforward. You can say no fossil fuels inputs into your building, on-site renewable energy to the extent practical. So you can say, is geothermal possible here? Is solar possible here? I don't think we have wind in Narberth, but if that's not possible, then commit to purchase all your renewable energy, all your remaining energy from a renewable source. How many of you do that? I do that. Okay, just like we do, they can do that. And then ultimately commit to joining Narberth's community choice aggregation when that is running. I think that's a pretty straightforward and easily achievable. So we think we're actually pretty close at establishing the metrics for at least two of these three categories, and probably not that far away from the first one, reducing carbon inputs, that we could put on a list and say, you have to do this. So where's the rub? The rub isn't how do you actually administer it? How do you actually enforce it? And that's where we think further work has to happen for this to be practical. We have ideas about how it could be administered, but we really think that if this is a framework that council feels is a good policy and that we can fill out with the right metrics, we feel we're at the point where we really need to have a collaborative process with the Planning Commission, the Environmental Advisory Commission, the staff, and potentially a representative from council to really problem solve these questions. How do we document an application? How do we evaluate an application? How do we make sure they comply with the application? Which is really not my expertise, the Planning Commission's expertise, it's staff expertise. So what we would ask for is if council supports this direction, we can continue research on some aspects of this, but we would like to have the direction to have council or staff convene a small working group comprised of those entities to really just troubleshoot, problem solve, and work through how that could actually work in a way that is practical, but delivers us some reasonable return for what we would be giving to developers in terms of the bonus. In terms of that, nothing has changed really from the first proposal, except that we did receive some public comment that if somebody wants to build an ADU, that should also follow the green building provisions. And so that is now part of the recommendation. That is another point of feedback that will be useful from council is what we're giving appropriate for what we're getting. So that's where we are on that. There's one other minor part of this, which is it's possible that somebody in trying to pursue this bonus, or maybe even just to do some green improvements to their house, might run into a conflict with the zoning code. An easy one to visualize is they would like to put a solar panel on their roof, but the slope doesn't conform to the code. So what do? You go for variance? Well, we can't do that because you can't get a variance for something like that. Do we rewrite the code? That could be complicated because the technology always changes. And you know how hard it is for us to write a code. So the idea we have is simply to create a new special exception that says if you are creating green infrastructure of certain kinds, and you need a dimensional variance from the code, you need to like encroach in a setback, or you need to do something on your roof, or I can't imagine what, because I can't imagine all these technologies. You can go to the zoning hearing board and ask for a special exception, which, as you know, is a process. If you demonstrate you meet the criteria, you're entitled to a special exception. So they would meet certain criteria, which could include things like you have to demonstrate that what you're asking for is actually necessary, that it's the minimal amount of relief that you need. There may be a provision that there's no unintended consequences for adjacent properties, which might rely on give adjacent property owners a chance to comment. But then that special exception would be granted. The other option, which came up at the Planning Commission, was simply to say, if you want to put a solar panel on, you can do it. It's just accepted from the roof rules. No special exception, you just do it. So that's a choice point too. So that's where we are with this. We're thinking about how to manage the bonus, and we're trying to think about how to anticipate improvements that might conflict with the code, and how we might make it less cumbersome for property owners to do that. One other thing about that, there was discussion at the Planning Commission that there is a concern that allowing these kinds of exceptions might run counter to some of the initial goals of the form-based code, which was to have buildings result in buildings that look like buildings in Marburg. So that would be a counterbalance we have to consider too. Anyway, that's where we are, and would be really happy to hear your thoughts about this. Thank you.
So, could you just expand a little bit, because I know you discussed this at the meeting, this notion that it might actually be, you might just get yourself back to where the form-based code is,
right,
if you did this, as opposed to it's sort of like exceeding the code.
Yes. So what council members are referring to is what would how would an applicant actually benefit? The principle we're trying to follow is that we would not create a situation where an applicant could build any more than they otherwise could under the code. That's not as easy as that, but that's the basic principle. We don't want to get more density than was envisioned under the form-based code. It works a little differently in different districts. So in the 5A district, where council reduced the building height to 25 feet and 2 stories, what we would say is if you did this, you could go back to 36 feet and 3 stories, which was what the original form-based code had. So you would get back to that. In the 5B zone, we currently allow 45-story buildings. Excuse me, 45. Please don't.
Yeah.
45-foot high buildings, but we only allow 3 stories. So we would allow a 4-story building, so you can build more in the building, but you would not get extra volume. So that might be more units, but smaller units, something like that. Then in the residential districts like 3A, 3B, 3C, we have this quirky provision, you might recall came before council, whereby if you're building a new house or expanding a house, the facade can be 115% of the average facade on the block. So what we would propose to say is we change the base rule that the facade must only be 100%, but if you do the rebuilding, you can do 115%. So it just gets you back to where we are now. And the ADUs, of course, is something that didn't even exist until a few months ago. So we're basically saying, you can do an ADU, but you have to do more to get to doing the ADU. So I think, does that answer your question?
Well, I mean, just to recap the conversation.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I guess my second question is for probably more for John than anyone, because if the person agrees to only use, renewable energy, but then the house is sold, is that the kind of thing where we could put that kind of deed restriction on a house?
You'd have to do a covenant.
But is it even possible?
It'd be voluntary for them to do so. And if it was there, I mean, the covenant would say, the declaration would say, it's a voluntary restrictive covenant of filing against the property that the borough has an ability to enforce. And if it's in violation, here are the remedies available.
Yeah, but that's the challenge. They built this bigger house. Well, you can't make them shrink the house.
You could. I mean, you could have.
Not in Narberth, it's happened outside.
I mean, our historic district ordinance says that if you violate that, you have to rebuild your historic house from before. I mean, it's you could do that if you wanted to do that and enforce it. Now, obviously, that's an extreme measure, but there are. I would imagine you would take plenty of potential avenues for recovery, whether it's fees or costs, enforcement, but it could be handled through a declaration that would run with the land. And when someone's doing a title search to buy that property, hopefully there's a title search, it would come up and hopefully they'd read it and make it clear.
In that sense, Mr. Walker, that would almost, although it would be a covenant, it would be like an easement, right? You sort of in perpetuity.
In perpetuity,
yeah. You're encumbered in this way.
That's correct.
It's, council member, that is the challenge. You put your finger on it. It's how do you actually make this work in perpetuity? How do you seek remedies if someone goes back and what they promise to do? We fully know that's difficult and challenging. We as planning commission can't solve that by ourselves. That's why we're saying if you like this policy direction, our next step would be to ask to work with staff, enforcement, solicitor to figure out what's realistic. And we can then bring that back to you so that you can assess, is this something that's worth doing for the borough?
Rob?
Thank you, Todd, for doing this and working with the EAC. And I know they'll probably want to keep working with you. It's still being drafted, right?
I did talk to the chair today.
Okay.
We'll be participating in the meeting on Monday.
Okay, terrific. So to my mind, no use of fossil fuels is the most important element in under that category. Some municipalities, as you know, have no new gas hookups for all new construction. So that guarantees that the home is all electric. And that's, I think, the most critical step. So, and that's a construction decision that will live on, regardless of where the electricity is coming from. So I'm very pleased, to me, that's the biggest priority.
Well, let me just say this is one of the issues that I was working on before I got on council, so I'm delighted to see it proceeding in this way. And I think we're nearing consensus here on how to proceed. I'm not hearing I don't see any big objections to council. So as a reminder, there were three requests three points where he wanted council's feedback. One is sort of these general green building guidelines. The second is the next step, which would be a small working group involving maybe one council member and the people he laid out. And then the third thing was this potential special exception for solar panels. So let's take that.
Any green infrastructure.
Yeah, let's take that item separately. So his proposal was that either we could say, let's put in a special exception for green infrastructure, or we could just say we're going to allow solar panels and perhaps, I don't know what else, geothermal, something. Maybe those two things, those are allowed. You don't need to go through the special exception process. Council members have any opinions as to
I would
either route?
I see his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks so much for such an informative discussion of these issues, Ms. Todd, and everyone. I'm at this time, Fred, I'm in favor of us just allowing these enhancements, allowing homeowners to do these things without having to obtain a special exception of the zoning hearing board. Unless there could be, unless we would consider a waiver of the application fee for people who were interested in making these kinds of proposals. Now, maybe that was discussed and I didn't listen properly, but generally an application fee to the zoning hearing board is pretty expensive, and that would add to the cost of what we're actually attempting to support people in creating.
All right. Does anyone object to the idea of allowing these projects to go forward without, without using the special exception process? Solicitor Walker?
Well, I think it needs to be more refined than that. I mean, it's one thing to have the solar panels, as Mr. Presley said, if you have to adjust your roof in order to put that solar panel on, then you are working against what may have been the purpose of the form-based code. So you could fine tune it to say that if you're not making any structural changes, then that situation would be by right. I mean, there might be some public safety issues, whether or not there's still access for fire companies through the roof that may need to be looked at, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing depending on what you'd like to do.
Samantha?
That was really almost my question, John, but you said it more eloquently. Is there, I don't want to add more bureaucracy and hoops for folks trying to do the right thing. However, is there some advantage to keeping with your roof and slope with the solar panels? Is there some advantage for a homeowner to have professionals say, actually, that slope, it's not safe for the reasons you mentioned, John. And in fact, for you to safely do that, this is what we recommend, and therefore grant the variance.
Well, and again, a special exception is different than the variance.
Or special exception,
And just to make sure everyone's aware, again, the special exception, if you meet the criteria, if you meet all the requirements that you have to prove, the zoning hearing board has to give you that relief. It's not a discretionary aspect like a variance might be. So really, it's just that, and it's essentially like a conditional use done by the zoning hearing board. And again, you can do it by conditional use if you'd like to handle it instead. But it's not. I understand that. But it isn't a situation where neighbors technically come out and say, no, we don't like it. It doesn't look okay. If they've established they've met the established criteria in your code, the zoning hearing board is legally obligated to grant that exception, special exception too. But there is that bureaucracy. There is the cost that's involved in that, just like any other zoning.
All right. Okay, Andrea?
Is there any way to do a special application fee, like a lesser application fee, so it doesn't become burdensome on that?
Yeah, Samantha?
Yeah, so actually I was going to suggest when my gut reaction when Todd first gave us this idea to consider was that we require special exception, but the borough waived the application fee for it. And so that would be what I would recommend to council in terms of how to proceed with it.
It just makes me a little nervous, like letting people set the slope of their roof without some kind of oversight.
Yeah.
I mean, because there are reasons other than aesthetic.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. And the special exception would also be the opportunity to then impose that condition of filing that declaratory or the declaration of restricted covenant. I mean, I guess under the zoning code, you could provide that as a requirement in and of itself, but you can make it a condition of special exception approval that be filed by some certain amount of time.
All right. So Bob, I'm seeing, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, like, it would be, I think it's preferable to have the zoning hearing board review the application, but to anyone who's worried about, if we didn't have that provision in place, it's still, we have to remember that an applicant who, say, wanted to put a solar device on their roof would still be required to obtain a building permit. It's not like it wouldn't be permitted and inspected and, still have to meet building code and fire safety code and all of those other things. So I don't think that's like that's the reason to do it. I think the reason to do it is that we probably could entice, especially if we had a free fee or something, waive the fee for this, that we could then support the residents in like installing these things with the best possible solution. And I think so it more is like a kind of supportive measure in addition to the need to apply for a building permit, et cetera, et cetera. That's my comment.
Right. Samantha?
Just one real quick point of information for council is as part of the 2022 budget and fee schedule, council did approve waiving the fees for green infrastructure for building permits. So you are required to get building permits, but you don't have to pay fees if it's related to green infrastructure.
All right.
Just so far right now, we know, what you foresee, a solar unit or something, but there could be new technologies that you can't necessarily foresee how they're going to use it. And that's another reason to have another set of eyes on it, to make sure, like some sort of weird new technology.
All right. So what I'm hearing here is special exception process, but waive the fees. That's what I'm hearing is the consensus right now. All right. So let's work on drafting that then. Okay. And then going back to the general guidelines, I think I heard no objections to the general guidelines that you presented to the idea. So any objections to the idea of a small working group doing this? Okay. So let's move forward with that. If anybody on council wants to volunteer to be the council member on the working group, let me know. Thank you to Jen, and thanks Todd for your presentation.
Sure. Thank you for putting me on right when I walked in. We'll be sending our report on saldo, short-term rental occupancies, which we also discussed. I'll be sending that in a few days, so you'll see that soon.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you. Thank you,
Todd.
Thank you. Samantha.
President. Thank you. I apologize. I didn't think of this. We're looking at item 4 with agenda changes. Realizing that Mr. Collins is with us here in person tonight, I would like council to consider moving his agenda item 10B to 10A.
Okay. Would anyone like to move to make action item 10B, 10A?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second? Any discussion? All right, so we're voting on moving agenda item 10D to 10A. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay. Let us move on to item number 9, the consent agenda.
I move the Borough Council approve the consent agenda items A through F.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, we're voting on the consent agenda. All those in favor of passing the consent agenda items, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. All right, let us move on to the new 10A, which is a consideration and proposal to apply for federal Reconnecting Communities program for Essex Avenue Tunnel study. All right.
So I guess I'll introduce our guests who we've had here before, but just for the benefit of anyone who may watch this recording later. My thanks to Mr. Bill Collins for joining us tonight, from Simone Collins, who is working on the Station Square project for us. And in discussions with him about our funding strategy for the program, he brought this great opportunity to my attention and the attention of the borough's subcommittee working on this project, and we all thought it was worthwhile for him to come and speak to council tonight about getting authorization to move forward with this really interesting and exciting grant opportunity. So Bill, thanks for being here, and if you could just maybe give council some of the background you gave the committee the other night about this.
Bill Collins, Simone Collins. I think I'd like to start out with just a brief update of the last committee meeting in Station Square. We got really good feedback from the alternative schematics that we had presented earlier in the summer. So we have good direction on developing what we think is towards your preferred alternative. We still have options, make decisions, but the direction was really good. That was a major part of the meeting. The other part of the meeting that was significant was the funding strategy, which you've already started with your application to the state DCED for multimodal transportation funds. The borough decided to commit $60,000 to leverage $270,000 from DCED. There's the technical application, and then there's the outreach to partners, elected officials. It is a political process. And Samantha is very knowledgeable about both sides of these things, and she's been helping us with the technical. She's been taking the lead on your outreach. What we found was that the infrastructure program, they're bound and determined to get the first grants out this year. There's reasons for that, practical reasons and political reasons. But for the infrastructure bill, there's about 5 years of funding. And there's a number of different programs, and they're rolling them out in real time and giving guidance updates, and it's a running game. The application that the borough was considering to try to get funds for the work that it had wanted to do under a DVRPC TCBI, Transportation Planning Grant. Technically, the borough is eligible to go after federal money for that. But when we looked at that compared to going after a Reconnecting Communities program grant, it was our recommendation that the Reconnecting Communities was your best option to get money and to get a higher level of funding, and funding for the things that are central to your goals, like making the improvements to Station Square and the connections to Station Square. So when we looked at the criteria for the Reconnecting Communities, and then the ideas that came up out of the committee, one of the ideas was, could a new ADA accessible underpass to connect both sides of the borough and both sides of the station, could that be decoupled from SEPTA station improvements? And when we looked at it, it was a really good idea. It came out of your committee. When we looked at it, we said, why not? Because SEPTA and Amtrak had already told the borough, we have no plans on the books to make the station improvements in the foreseeable future. And yet, year after year, your borough is inaccessible between sides of the borough and people wanting to come here and then get home, or vice versa. So the idea to decouple it and take initiative by the borough was you acted on that going after the multimodal in the state. And when we looked at the criteria for the federal grants, we found out that the money that the borough would commit plus state money together is eligible to match the federal money. And that program, Reconnecting Communities, funds both planning, and their definition of planning is very broad, and construction. So Narberth Borough needs planning and engineering funds to take you past what the state funds would do. State funds are for preliminary engineering to prove feasibility, ramps, underpass connections. The federal money will take a winning project through engineering, environmental clearance, and permitting to be construction ready if they fund what you ask for. So we looked at how competitive we thought Narberth Borough was in terms technically, and Reconnecting Communities is specifically designed to remedy past infrastructure obstacles that were created and divided communities. So physically, Narberth is right up there in need, technically. The other part of this program is to remedy past injustices for communities that have been impacted inordinately, disadvantaged economic communities, other minority communities. So that's an area where Narberth has been making efforts from its comp plan through enacting projects, going after funding, working with developers, the things we heard tonight. Those are the things where I've been working with Samantha to say, how can we strengthen that side of our application? You have the commitment, you've demonstrated things. And so what we suggested to Samantha was year one is going to be your pivotal year. We've been attending all the information webinars, and they do polls. And they ask the attendees, do you plan to apply this year? What kind of would you apply for? Where are you located? So you're starting to get snapshots of who's in those meetings and who's interested. From the responses, we see the best advantage for Narberth specifically and many communities, if they have the capacity and if they've done the pre-planning to apply in year one. So that's what we recommend to Samantha. So the formula that's available for planning grants under Reconnected Community is 1 to 5. So if you put in 20% and you're eligible, the federal government will fund up to 80%. So that means if you used your 330 composite total for the local and state match, you're over 1.3 eligibility to get from the federal government, 1.6 million total project. Now, will communities get that? There's going to be high competition. And so a grant strategy would be to ask for what you need and have a fallback position embedded in there so that if they grant less, which a lot of agencies do, you would know what your priorities are and you could retarget the money that you would have. I can go down a number of rabbit holes on the details, but that frames it for you. The application came up probably 2.5 months ago and is due in 4 weeks, which can be done. We're going to need to work closely to do that. Samantha's already started. I'm looking at Michelle's name. Samantha's already started reaching out to your elected officials, just to tell them, here's where we are on the Station Square. By the way, we're applying for the state multimodal, and we also want to be eligible for the federal grant. So our job, when you tell us to get started, is to go full tilt, contact the team that would be needed, create a project scope, figure out what the budget would be for the application, and complete a compelling application. Compelling application, we think, is easy. It's figuring out what to do. That's going to be the full tilt run. But it's doable. It's kind of the same way we did the multimodal fee. That was a short-term project too. The only cost for this project is the application fee that we would bill you. So the matches match each other. Is that a good overview?
Yeah, again, without trying to go too far down a rabbit hole, again, the problem that this grant tries to solve is part of our comp plan talks about the need for ADA access to the train station. And, part of the multimodal, tries to work on some planning and some partnership with SEPTA and Amtrak to remedy those issues. However, myself and I don't put words in Bill's mouth, but I get the sense from Bill that he's also concerned that, who knows what the time frame would be for SEPTA and Amtrak to ever do that. So looking at the options the borough would have of its own accord to solve the division of the community because of the railroad, as well as the access issues to the train station, changing the tunnel at Wynwood, that's not a feasible project. The bridge will obviously help, once that's done. But even when we had the bridge fully functional, to tell someone, especially someone with a mobility issue, that they have to walk over to the bridge and then walk over the bridge and then walk down to the station, I don't think certain people will be really thrilled to hear that. And again, the issues the community has had of a north sort of south division, existed even when we had the bridge fully operational. And the last historical note I'll point out that, Bill and I had a chance to share with the committee is looking through some historical records. I found that back in the 1920s, when the folks at Amtrak and SEPTA originally envisioned turning the property they own at Sound Harbor Park into a rail yard, they also envisioned a tunnel on Essex as part of that project. So I think there's a strong historical case for it. I think it would solve a big problem in our community that people have mentioned before, but have never really expected that we would be able to solve. And to be able to do this without having to commit any additional borough funds beyond the application fee and application costs, I think would be just tremendous for the community.
It's a lot to digest, but Borough got itself into the Station Square business, and it's a really good project. If you were to go for money just for Station Square, you'd be in with hundreds of communities that are looking to make cultural improvements. If you went for transportation money to solve that without solving the accessibility issues, they're going to say you haven't addressed the primary transportation elements. So as we've been looking at the Station Square, we're saying we have to know how to approach the accessibility. And then if we're really serious about this, we have to try to advance that as a borough, because our other partners won't initiate that. They will help us once we get going, but SEPTA and Amtrak are not going to be the ones to initiate it. So it's a proactive approach. It's the next step on the proactive mission that you've already set yourself on.
I do want to say that in addition to the Station Square, this also incorporates other town center planning. The initial grant that we've applied for includes planning for various stormwater projects and also for
there's 3 tasks in the multimodal.
Yeah.
Stormwater is one of them.
Yeah.
The access to Station Square,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Station Square itself.
So this application would also allow us to use that planning money towards these projects as well.
So let's say you find all 3 of those tasks feasible. This federal grant, and you'd have the preliminary engineering, a successful federal grant will let you take through the rest of the engineering.
Right.
Otherwise, you're waiting a year to try to apply in a larger competition field. And this federal grant is the only one that will fund engineering. The rest all fund construction. So, and because you have an obstacle, a significant obstacle, you're highly eligible for this program. So.
I mean, I think the fact that people in Narberth identify themselves as Southsiders or Northsiders, tells you historically, that the railroad line has been a barrier. So I don't know how to convey that in a grant application, but it's definitely true. And I do find it appealing that the borough's match. Should we get the grant that we've applied for, the borough will be laying out $60,000 along with the state funding. But should we get both grants, the borough will still be laying out only $60,000. So the second grant does not involve more of a, as you said, it does not involve more of a borough.
You've already committed to 60.
Yeah,
you wouldn't be
we're for 60
if you got the
if we get this grant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The last component I wanted to highlight, kind of follow up on your question, Brad, is as Bill mentioned earlier, we found that the Safe Streets for All program, the borough unfortunately would have trouble being competitive for that program. So as much of that as possible as well that we can fold into this application, we would too, things like gathering traffic data, also the other parameters we're hoping to accomplish with the Safe Streets for All in order to do our traffic audit.
That's a good point. We want to build in those things like traffic analyses that would directly contribute to your multimodal, which is your core of the borough. If you can solve that, then the peripheries will start to figure themselves out. But so when we scope your project in the next 4 weeks, we're going to try to include as many of those early TCBI elements as possible.
Any other questions from members of council?
Just another question, but more of a comment for council. I just think in the spirit of connecting communities, I'd be remiss not to point out public comment of Michael Galdini that if we are really intentionally looking at grants and policies and tasks to connect communities, we should really consider some of the data and the challenge Mr. Galdini put to us on how do we allow diverse socioeconomic status folks into our community as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, seeing no more discussion, someone, all right, the motion on the floor is to apply for the federal Reconnecting Communities program for the Essex Avenue Tunnel Study and to authorize Simone Collins to do the application. All those in favor of the applying for the grant? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Thank you. So I was writing this. Did you just vote?
Yeah.
You just voted?
Congratulations.
We'll start tomorrow.
660. All right, let's move on to what is listed as 10A. The consideration is approval of ordinance 1050 for stormwater regulations. Sorry, I said too much. Who wants to actually make this?
I move the Borough Council adopt ordinance 1050 for stormwater regulation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ara. All right. Discussion, Mr. Walker.
So I think we've talked about this ordinance amendment generally in the past. This is a mandated review that all municipalities are going through in our region, different counties, to revise their stormwater ordinances to make sure that they're in compliance with DEP's MS4 requirements. So part of this ordinance is simply taking what we have already and providing new revisions that they are now requiring all of our ordinances and stormwater ordinances to have. For example, how to handle, I think, new items are how to handle erroneous permits, some revisions to illegal drainage hookups and how all those are addressed. But 90% of the requirements were already in the existing ordinance. So the primary purpose is we need to enact revisions to our stormwater ordinance. As you recall, we talked about this at a prior meeting, and there was the Pennsylvania Environmental Commission, PEC, made a number of recommendations related to requiring there to be green stormwater methods proposed, and if they can't be done, council, they would have to seek a waiver from council, essentially. We have essentially incorporated all of PEC's recommendations. They had some preferences to some definition changes, some reviews, plans that are in line with what they'd like to see done. So those are incorporated in here as well. It's been reviewed by our engineer's office. As you recall, we discussed it before. We left it kind of open to have a little bit of additional reviews. There were some slight changes to that. One of those significant changes, not substantive, but we did provide for a stormwater chapter exemptions chart that makes it sort of easier for those that are need to make sense whether or not their project has to go through the aspects of this ordinance to apply. And the other substantive issue that's not required for the MS4 compliance is that we are lowering the amount of the impervious surface. I believe previously it was 2,000, and now if you are between 500 and 999 square feet, you need to go through a what we're calling a simplified stormwater review, and that review is attached as a packet here. So it's not as significant as if you had to go through a full stormwater. You're not exempt from the chapter, but there's still that middle step in order to have some mechanisms put in place. So now it would be 499 feet and under, which is still your average smaller patio or deck or something that would, stone pavers, that would still be exempt, but between that 500 and 1,000, you'd have to go through this new approach. And that's not unique to the borough. Other municipalities do that. And the simplified stormwater review exhibit is sort of a universally used document. So that will significantly, I think, benefit the stormwater runoff throughout the borough in what is already a pretty built up area. I took careful reviews to ensure that any plans that do require a road deviation in a land development to come before council to make that decision at the council level. Certainly if it's just a building permit or something smaller, I don't believe it's prudent to have it come before you, and that would be through the recommendation of the engineer. But if it is a land development, a major project, they're going to have to obtain these waivers from you, and you're going to have to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, and I got that from some of the problems we've had in the past on some projects to address that, so it wouldn't happen again in the future. So overall, we'll meet the requirements for the MS4 conditions, and it provides some of the feedback that I forget if it's from the infrastructure committee under the EAC for addressing the impervious areas. So it's been advertised, it's been at the law library, and is in a position for council's consideration.
All right. Any questions from members of council? Concerns? Just as a reminder, we do hear a lot from community members who are concerned about new projects and their effects on stormwater runoff. So I think it's going to be great to be able to say, yeah, anything of really any size now has to deal with all of the stormwater that's coming off of that property. I mean, it has to go through and be approved by the borough, and stormwater impact has to be dealt with. So it's good to see that in the final version. Said it before, I'll keep saying. Okay, so let's vote. So we are voting on ordinance 1050 for stormwater regulations ordinance update. All those in favor? Ordinance 1050.
Aye.
All right, unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Okay, the former 10B, which is joining the DVPLT.
May the council consider resolution 2022-20 to reduce borough expenses by joining the Delaware Valley Property Liability Trust.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ara. Okay. Samantha.
Sure, thank you. So the proposal here, as part of our continual efforts by staff, which I'll document in more detail at the budget presentation at your October work session. But one of the many things we've been working to do to make sure that taxpayer money is spent the best way possible is we did an evaluation of our liability insurance. And we got proposals both from our current insurer, CBIZ, as well as the Delaware Valley Property and Liability Trust. The borough already gets its workers' compensation insurance from the Delaware Valley Insurance Trust. And to be clear, I mean, they do a great job with that. And also to be clear, CBIZ does a great job in terms of their service to the borough on insurance. And even as part of this proposal, the borough would continue to have a relationship with CBIZ because we would still get our pollution coverage from them, which we're required to have to send sewage to Lower Marion Township, that Divot or DVPLT does not offer that coverage. I apologize. The document originally in the packet was an outdated document. The one that was sent to council and later added to the packet is the correct one, which shows when you wash everything out between coverages and the various discounts and bonuses and things that Divot can provide, they are less expensive than CBIZ. In the short term, as well as I think in the long term, they would be as well, because after you've been a member for 2 years, you're entitled to some extra funding from the insurance trust. So I think in the short and long term, I mean, of course, the borough, after our initial period with Divot, would certainly want to make sure we're getting the best value again. But I think it's likely that that this is where our best value is going to be. And, you know, the other great thing, you know, kind of their sales pitch letter was included in your packet, but just to highlight for council and the public, Divot is not a commercial insurance provider. It's an insurance trust made up solely of members who are other municipalities. So, you know, no one's making a profit, so to speak, and they really know municipalities, and they have a risk control team on staff that is very well versed in, you know, the issues municipalities face. So, so I certainly recommend in favor of it. I think it'll save the borough money. I think it'll provide us with some better coverage and some better support in terms of risk management and risk control for the borough.
Comments? I'd say, you know, I did look it over, and it does look like the coverage limits on just about everything are higher. So it's more coverage, and it covers scenarios that are not currently covered by our current insurance, and it's cheaper. So it really seems like a win all around. Mm-hmm. All right. We are voting on resolution 2022-20 to reduce borough expenses by joining Delaware Valley Property and Liability Trust. All those in favor? Opposed? No, that's everybody. Okay, unanimous. The former 10C stormwater bump outs. Michelle's not here. I already know. Well, does anybody have it?
I don't have it.
Anybody have a call up to make the motion?
Basically, it's just I make a motion and you start putting word 2 on the agenda.
Sure. Would someone like to make a motion based on the agenda?
I can do it if no one in the room wants.
I got it. I thought I had no word on this, which I don't know. My first day on the job. I'd like to make a motion for the consideration to award the stormwater bump out base bid and alternate to Albert G. Cipollone Jr. and Sons for $121,515.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Cindy, thank you. Discussion. Not Ira.
Okay.
Samantha, yes.
Thank you. So as we talked about last month, as part of the county grant, we were awarded for $100,000 to do stormwater bump outs per our pollution reduction plan with DEP. We went out to bid with the project. Thankfully, the low bid is kind of within what we imagined. So the grant is a total of $125,000. The county gave us $100,000. We had to match it with $25,000. The low bid is right in the ballpark of that. The firm that will be doing the work, our engineer spoke very highly of. So I would recommend in favor of council approving this bid.
All right. Any discussion? All right. Let's vote on awarding the stormwater bump out bid to Albert G. Cipollone Jr. and Sons. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you. That's all of our action items. The information items, reports have been filed. Let's take this down. I do want to highlight the Public Works report. So we've had a lot of resident concerns about trash in the downtown area. It's been a topic of much discussion, and it's been it's been discussed in committees here for a while now, and the Public Works Department has been considering options. So they are going to be cleaning up some new trash cans and bringing them out to the downtown area. And they're also, in the short term, going to be dealing with overflowing trash cans when they appear. Basically, we have Republic, which is our trash service. They come out once a week to the downtown area and deal with those cans, but that's still not enough. So in the short term, the Public Works Department is going to deal with overflowing trash as they become aware of it. And then we're also looking for longer term solutions probably for next year. Samantha?
Yeah, and definitely, council in the borough office has certainly heard from a lot of residents who've had issues, not just with the downtown area, but with residential pickup issues. So just building up what the council president said, it's something that, the borough administration is taking very seriously. And we're certainly looking into some options for how to remedy it, when our current contract with Republic expires long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as a reminder, if you personally are if you don't get your garbage picked up, there's instructions on the borough website. You should contact Republic directly, give them your address. If it's your whole street, tell them it's your whole street. And then they should make arrangements to pick up. If they don't, then contact the borough office and we will make sure it happens. And there's a provision in our contract that involves damages if they don't make a pickup. So, we're going to give them a chance to make the pickup, and then if they don't, we...
Yeah, exactly. What we've settled on is we'll send Public Works out to take care of it, and then we'll assess those damages to Republic to offset the cost of the taxpayers of Public Works having to go out to do it.
Sorry, Andrew.
Also, it's my understanding that even if they do pick it up, but if it's a recurring problem, please contact the office and let them know as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Let's get that trash behind us. Okay, we have some items of new business. First is the EIT and the local service taxes. Okay.
So following up on last month's meeting, there were some questions from council and the public. So I did my best in the intervening time period to try to answer some of those questions. So in the updated memo I have for council, I took the original memo and then put a preface on it in an attempt to answer some of those questions that were raised. If you want me to go through any of those questions and answers, I'm certainly willing to do that. If we have any new questions or concerns, I'm happy to talk about those. And otherwise, just look forward to getting a better sense of what direction council wants to go with this idea.
All right, so I'm gonna lead off. So we had our initial analysis from Berkheimer that gave us an estimate of what the borough, what sort of revenues would come out of an EIT of 1%. But it turns out that Berkheimer was not accounting for non-residents. They gave us a number based on the number of residents. They, for various reasons, they felt that they couldn't give us a very good estimate of non-residents. So in reality, probably the actual sum that would be raised from an EIT is going to be higher than what they're estimating because non-residents would pay some. We're trying to get a sense from local communities that are also bordering Lower Merion, how much they raise from non-residents to get a better guess. But, I've seen the places that I've seen have been 25, 40%. I think our nearest place is about 21% was White Marsh Township, which is also bordering Lower Merion. So, whatever our estimate is, if it's 20%, it's like another quarter of whatever, 125% of the estimate that we got basically might be a better estimate. So based on that, given that there's probably more revenue out there than we're expecting, I guess my question is, would a 0.5% EIT allow us to, fulfill our financial goals for next year and also allow us to do the property tax, the homestead exemption that we had in mind?
Sure. So our original estimate was about, in year one, was about 700,000. And again, that's only because the fourth quarter taxes aren't paid until the following year. So the EIT collected October through December, we wouldn't get until January of 2024 if we did this. So in the first year, Berkheimer originally estimated around, we were a little conservative on Berkheimer's estimate. We kind of settled on $700,000. If you throw 25% onto that, that's another about $175,000 on there. So that gets you up to $875,000. And then if you cut that in half, you'd be looking at, about 430, 440. If you did that, you'd probably then be looking, if you wanted to keep if you wanted to continue to dedicate 200,000 of it to a homestead exemption, in year one, you'd get about, a little over 200,000 for capital projects, which, yeah, we could make that work. I mean, the good or bad thing about capital projects, as we're learning over the last year or so, you can't put those off for forever. But, to put something off for a year wouldn't be too bad. And obviously in the next year, when we would start getting fourth quarter collections as well, then you'd basically be back on our original proposal where we'd have 200,000 going to homestead, 500,000 going into infrastructure projects. So, sorry, that was the long way of saying yes, that we can make it work.
I know that a lot of residents took a look at 1%. We have some very high owners in the community, I'm pleased to say, but nonetheless, it can cause some sticker shock. So if we can accomplish our goals with a 0.5% EIT, that might be a better way to move forward. I'm seeing nods. So maybe let's try to work that into the budget proposal for next year and see how that costs out.
I'll admit, I was actually expecting a lot more. Sorry,
I'm sorry. Let me open it up. I talked, but let me open it up. Anybody else?
No, I'm fine with it.
I just can't clarify this non-residents. So you mean people who live in Lower Merion that have?
So like me.
Correct.
Yeah.
We got one right here. Yeah.
Yeah. So the folks like myself who live in a community that does not have an earned income tax and work in Harvard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, anyone who lives in Lower Merion would
Pretty much.
and works here.
Yeah, in some places.
May I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead, Bob.
Oh, thanks. I think I read it may have been in one of Samantha's memos or in an email, that she was possibly recommending a reduction of millage, a reduction of the property tax rate, perhaps instead of applying for homestead. And so I'd just like to hear more about that possibility, that option. That seems appealing to me.
Yeah. So actually, I would like to back off that recommendation, giving it more thought, because my original thought on that was that there was some concern from the business community about how it would impact them, given that what their taxes are already and such. The thing I forgot is, I'm not worried about any of the, no offense to them, but I'm glad they're here, but I'm not really worried about the large chains in Harvard and like that, but just thinking about the small businesses in our downtown area. And then I remembered that most of them do not own the property where their business is, they rent. And so even if we did a millage reduction as opposed to the homestead, they likely would not benefit from it. Just their landlord, would be pocketing that money, which would not be our intention. The other thing that was brought to my attention is, the value of the Narberth's millage rate compared to other communities. And again, there's some confusion about, our solid waste millage and how that factors in. And I can talk with our solicitor recently about that topic. We will almost 100% will be changing how that works in the 2023 budget. But even just our general fund millage of 9.865, it's so hard to compare apples to apples because it's a little bit of a circular argument in that, the one argument is our millage rate is so high, partly because we don't have any EIT. And then, of course, the counter argument is that, okay, well, if you implement the EIT, why can't you lower the millage rate then? And there's so many things that go into municipal finance and a total tax burden. I did try to provide some information about, the sources of taxation in other communities, but like a lot of people understandably want, because they're right beside us, want to compare us to Lower Merion, which has half the millage rate, less than half the millage rate that we do. However, when you look at the business privilege tax that Lower Merion generates, as well as the local service tax that they generate, they have such a developed commercial area, especially even in proportion to how big they are, that their residents basically benefit from that. So part of the direction the borough has been going has been to encourage, commercial growth in the borough. And we are finally now starting to see some of the benefits of that. 114 Forest, the Elm, opened up this year. And quite honestly, that is pretty much the sole reason why I did not recommend a property tax increase when I did the budget last year. Of course, we have some other construction in the downtown with 100 Forest and 203 Haverford. But, being a good steward of our finances, I just don't want to bet the budget on those projects. And then heaven forbid, thankfully they are on track and I haven't heard any problems with any of them. But if something were to happen and we don't do any kind of, otherwise change to our revenue, now you're going to be eaten into your fund balance, because we'll talk a lot more about this on October 6th. But something we talked about in the last few meetings here already is that, a lot of the FNA talked a lot about this actually earlier tonight. A lot of the easy things we could do in the budget, we were able to accomplish this year. And so we were able to absorb, and we'll talk about this with the police vehicles in our next agenda item. We've been able to absorb a lot of unexpected expenses into the budget this year because of a lot of the proactive things we've done. And again, that kind of goes back to our capital projects. We've had so many things break in the last year or two. And I am certainly not blaming past management. They did a tremendous job in building the borough's financial base up to where it is and where it needs to be, as we talked about last year. But we've had the HVAC here at 100 Conway. That the low bid was give or take $500,000. We had a major roof problem at the library last year. We had the boiler suddenly fail in the middle of winter at the library last year. We just talked earlier tonight about, putting ourselves in a position where if we have emergency repairs, we want to borrow money for it. So, the borough has a lot of capital needs. And if we put those off, they're going to catch up with us eventually. And until we get further along in the development of our business community, again, those capital improvements aren't going to wait on that, whether we want them to or not. So that's why our millage. It's a complicated subject. That's my best effort to try and present why our millage rate is what it is in a digestible way, and why I would be reluctant to lower the millage rate even if we had an EIT. And again, the other thing too about lowering the millage rate versus the homestead exemption is, again, commercial properties or people we wouldn't intend to benefit from it would be the beneficiaries of a millage rate reduction. Whereas with the homestead exemption, it's only borough residents in a home that they live in that would be benefiting from it, not landlords, not big businesses, that sort of thing. Sorry, Bob, I went all over the place in answering that question, but I hope I actually answered the actual question you had.
Yeah, and then some. Thanks so much.
So Bob, I also looked at that, what the effect would be. And I think for the same amount of tax reduction, in other words, if we gave back $200,000 worth of millage tax reduction, I think the average homeowner would see about, well, it depends. It depends on how expensive your house is, but a lot of the money that we'd be giving back would be going toward, big properties. The Elm has over $5 million its assessment. There's a lot of houses in Narberth that have a $100,000 assessment. So the Elm would be getting 50 times as much tax relief as these, homeowners in a bungalow. So, I mean, that's my concern. A lot of it would be going to,
Thank you both for the additional food for thought. I really appreciate the perspective.
I just have one more sentence on
Sure.
that. Yeah, thank you for pointing out. Yeah, the other benefit of the homestead exemption versus the millage rate deduction is homestead exemption benefits everyone equally, whereas a millage reduction, those who have more expensive homes will benefit more than those who have less expensive homes.
But one thing is, the tax implications for the borough are the same. So we can go through the budget process and we can say, we're going to dedicate this much to tax relief. And then we can still make this decision a little later as to whether it's going to be a homestead exemption or a millage reduction. It's the same effect for the budget. It's just how we structure it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you again.
So, the issue that I think we are already facing is that the community didn't understand this. It's very complicated, and we need to make a clearer description of what's going on here. Because there's a lot of people make assumptions about this that maybe aren't correct, and we need to have like a clear communication with examples of how it impacts various people. Within various situations, because as it stands, it will certainly soften the blow to lower the rate from 1% to 0.5. But there's still people who just don't understand this, and they fill in the void with incorrect information. And if we're going to do this, which it sounds like we're going to do, we need to to get information out there about like how this really works. Okay. And, again, it can't be like a 20-page memo. It needs to be something that people can understand. And maybe we even need to have an information session to explain it to people. Because as it stands, people, are very confused about this. People that talk to me are confused about it.
Okay.
Would it be possible to do a mailer to all the houses in Narberth? I know we don't do that because it's not environmentally friendly, but people can.
Expensive too.
It is expensive, I know.
But, yeah, like I will admit, sometimes you get, frustrated when people won't avail themselves of the resources the borough offers to notify them about things going on. However, I mean, I don't think, if council want to go in this direction, I mean, once a year, like last year, we did a mailer to everyone about the historic district ordinance. We're talking about doing a mailer once a year, especially if there's a topic council thinks warrants that level of attention. I don't have a problem with us doing that.
I don't honestly think a mailer is going to solve the problem. They're not going to read it, and maybe
no. Sorry, I meant I was thinking of like a mailer that would invite people to some kind of that.
I mean, it can explain it as well, but we could also invite them. Could do both.
You can invite them. You could have a Zoom meeting where you discussed it. I just think that there's a lot of people who have negative reactions. Some of which are you're not going to fix. Okay, they don't want you to raise taxes because all their other bills are going up too. But there are other people who just don't understand what you're doing. Because it is complicated.
I mean, I know Cindy wants to jump in, but I would say that we haven't decided this yet, right? So the reason we haven't had like a public information session until now is because we haven't agreed to this.
Yeah,
we're not committed to this path.
I'm not finding fault in anybody. I'm just saying that I think it's important that if we are to move forward with this, that we get clear information there about it, so we can dispel some of some of the incorrect interpretations of it.
I agree. Cindy?
I think a one-page infographic that we put out on social media and the flash is a good idea, something that's simple and digestible. Because, I mean, you sold me. I was originally coming in actually with why aren't we reducing millage rate? And that's really compelling when you talk about the equity issues behind that. I'm easily sold on that. I did actually have what is a silly question now. If we do a homestead exemption, do individuals have to then apply for that? So there is actually some messaging because people could lose the opportunity to get that couple $100 rebate if they're not familiar with that because it doesn't automatically come off.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you would have to apply for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I would suggest we have this meet and greet on the books for October 7th for fire safety pits. We can add s'mores and EIT. So we can hand the people sticks and fire.
Yeah.
Or we tell them when they raise taxes. It's like a theme.
Let's think about that a minute, because we're going to be outside.
Yeah, torches and pitchforks.
Exactly.
How are we going to, because is that really a good, I mean, we could talk about it, but we can't really do a presentation outside.
We can. You know, FNA had talked about doing kind of a budget monopoly night, and we just felt like we had so much on the borough's plate. It wasn't an opportunity to do that. You know, to your point, we've often said, you know, democracy has to be in action too. I think we can have a meet and greet. We can throw this out on social media. Perhaps we wait to see what the temperature of the room is. And it may be helpful to have a special session with just some Q&As. But I would wait and get some information out there and allow folks to contact us.
Yeah, because I mean, the next step on this would be, if council wants to proceed to it, would be you'd actually have to consider an ordinance, and it'd go through the usual ordinance saying of you'd have to, have a meeting to consider advertising it, and then a meeting to consider approving it. Nothing would happen with this until your at the earliest your October business meeting. And I'm happy to take. I don't know if this would be helpful or not. I think I'm gonna need. The challenge for me is I try not to, but the position I'm in, I try not to take for granted my familiarity with the subject matter because I'm paid and have the time because I'm paid to do it, to be familiar with it. So I'm not saying I'm like smarter than anyone else. I'm just saying I'm literally paid to know these things. And we have a lot of smart people in this borough. So if council has any feedback on how I can maybe update that infographic I put together on like the third or fourth page of this memo, and could get something that's like digestible for social media out there, I would certainly be willing to take the time to do that.
I mean, I think the thing that usually helps with these is, you can call it an FAQ, but really what it is like myth and fact. Just like going through the common misinterpretations that people make about this and explain, like how it really works. Because I mean, again, someone who doesn't want this, like just a general principle, I'm not going to convince them to want it. But someone who doesn't understand it, I think you have a chance. And as we saw in the initial rollout, there were some really smart people who maybe didn't read every word you wrote and didn't get it. Okay? Former council people who like are used to reading that sort of stuff and like they missed the whole section and, still not happy, but like at least they're basing their, like that person you interacted with today, an email. Okay, well, okay, they may still not agree with you, but at least they understand what you're saying now.
Yeah. And Samantha, that may save your time. I mean, the fact that you took the time to write such a thorough answer today, and to your point, the person still may not agree, but really, I think respected our thought process on that. That would be really helpful if we could all have the same kind of one pager, so it doesn't fall on you.
I definitely agree. Yeah.
So we'll give you some feedback on how to clean up that chart. I think part of it is all the same color. It's like usually flow charts are different colors, I think. Graphic design is not my area at all.
Yeah, all of it's not mine either. So,
oh boy, Michelle's busy. Michelle
maybe I could have, I forget if they have any background on this or not, either Misty or Michelle. Let's take a look at it, especially since they're less familiar with the subject
I think
matter.
Michelle does, actually.
I think she does.
Yeah. All right.
Have a look at it. And plus, there are people who would potentially be interested in this FAQ and all that as well. So,
okay. So maybe so to proceed.
Fred?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I had a conversation with a resident about this, and to Ira's point, there was some things that they misunderstood. But as we talked through it, the one thing that they really eventually was like, oh, I guess I kind of need to wait and know more about the budget too, so that I can see why you need this extra money. And so that's another piece of this. And so I think, while it makes sense to try to help people understand things now, I think it also needs to be then part of the budget discussion and to help them really put the two things together. Because for this person, they were like, oh, okay, if you can tell me, if you can give me enough information about the budget so that I understand, yes, you need this money. And now I understand that you're saying you want to do this so you don't have to raise the property tax and negatively impact people who are on a fixed income, then okay, I'm okay with, and this is a person who would have to personally pay EIT. I'm okay having to pay the EIT so my neighbor who's retired, who only gets a pension, doesn't have a property tax increase. And I think if we can help people put all those pieces together, it might, for the ones that aren't just against any tax, I think they'll be able to say, oh, okay, now I get why you're doing this. And yeah, I don't like it, but it's okay. So anyway.
Particularly, I'm sorry, the Lower Merion just fell out. Do you know why their millage is lower? Because of their business privilege tax, because of their local service tax, because of the density that they invested in. I think that's a really important point to contextualize why Lower Merion looks different than we do.
Sure.
Well, I think there's another point which I think could help us, which is that the Narberth tax is not the majority of the tax they pay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
The school tax.
Your millage.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's like, that, I mean, yes, we will. And that
I'm just saying that they're not.
That's like, that is, sorry, I'm being a little cynical about this, but like, that's something that was in, Sean's budget presentations. I basically took the same slide and put it in mine last year.
Yeah.
Every municipal manager just kind of like shakes their head on that topic because in every town, it's such a battle to get people to understand that like the vast majority of their taxes are going to the school district.
Right. But what I was trying to get at is if you show them, like for this prototype case, not what their Narberth bill goes up as a percentage, but what their total bill goes up as a percentage, it's a less of an impact.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it won't work. I mean,
I'm certainly willing to do. I guess the thing I would struggle with that is like maybe if you could give me like the situations you want me to give numbers for, because the challenge for me is I can think of like 20 different situations that might be out there.
Yeah.
Whereas it might just be there's just like 3 that I really need to provide numbers for. So maybe if you could let me know like what situations would affect the most possible people, I would certainly be happy to make run the numbers for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could pick like 4 income levels, and and you could just pick 4 income levels and 4 property values. People can fill in, in the middle. But I agree.
Yeah, the other thing in terms of timing that I'd point out, is we will have the budget, our first budget work session as part of the council work session on the 6th. So that is true. Council and the public will also get that context before council would potentially consider anything on the 20th as well.
Yeah. So let's get the budget presentation so we can show people why. I mean, part of it we just discussed it tonight. We're buying a property at 3 Alma.
Mm-hmm.
We just saw the debt presentation on how much it's going to increase our debt load to purchase that property. This is something that the public was very interested in and we supported, but it costs money. So once the budget information is there, we can then proceed on, that'll be before the open house, right? That'll be like the day before the open house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So we'll start to do our outreach after that workshop, assuming that, once we approve, or once we get a sense of the broad strokes of the budget. That sound good to everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm making sure to check people online. All right, well, thanks for reminding me that we were moving a little too quickly through that, Samantha. So obviously people have a lot to say. So I appreciate your pointing that out. Okay, so 12B, the EV police fleet.
Can I?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, great. So I give so much credit to Officer Matt Belfi and Sergeant Mike Vernaccio. Officer Belfi put together this report in the council packet. I met with Sergeant Vernaccio and Officer Belfi to discuss it. They then presented this information to the Public Health and Safety Committee at its most recent meeting. And unfortunately, the kind of the short version here is the police vehicles we have all basically decided en masse that that they weren't going to be functional anymore. It was an issue that Chief Gallagher had started to bring to our attention earlier in the year, but unfortunately, with the transition with him and some other things, we weren't able to act on that until now. The other situation with our police vehicles is they're not compliant with our climate action plan. They're all gas powered. So I thought Officer Belfi and talking through it with the Public Health and Safety Committee, I think we've come up with a great plan to address the short-term public safety challenge we have by not having functioning police vehicles or reliable police vehicles. And there's a path here to, in the short term, establishing a police fleet that is electric and is more in line with our climate action plan. So basically, the short version is we have one vehicle that has a carbon monoxide issue that the officer primarily drives. It reports headaches and having to keep the windows down and that sort of thing. Let's see here. We have another vehicle where the suspension is shot, and then let's see here. And we have a third vehicle where we just had to replace the catalytic converter in it, and it probably would not pass inspection when it's due for inspection later this year. Also, folks who are very interested in the borough budget and keep an eye on that have noticed the tremendous amount we've had to spend. We spent already this year $30,000, give or take, on police vehicle repairs. And as you'll see in this presentation, we could have just about bought a new police vehicle for that much money. Mm-hmm. So the proposal is basically that we're going to sell off, get whatever we can for the vehicles we have, which is, we estimate somewhere between a few hundred to maybe $1,000 per vehicle with the condition that they're in.
That tells you a lot right there.
Yeah. With the funds that were already budgeted, a portion of those would go towards, we've already put a deposit down on a Nissan Leaf EV for the parking controller. He's been without a working vehicle for about 6 weeks now. So that would be a complete EV. It's already within the scope of the budget. We budgeted $52,000 for vehicle replacement, and the Nissan Leaf ended up costing us all after, the lights and, well, there aren't lights, sorry, with the decals and stuff, about $35,000. For the police department, they've requested, due to the timing of firing electric vehicles, to immediately be able to purchase 2 gas-powered vehicles. They would make a contribution to the Green Fund through a carbon fee that was calculated and reviewed by members of the EAC. And they did, at the discussion of PHS, have already put an order in for an electric Ford Lightning F-150 police model. And then next year, they would then transition from those two gas-powered vehicles to another Ford F-150 Lightning police model and a Chevy Blazer EV police model that will be coming out next year as well. We would, use the value of those cars to then, acquire make most of the payment towards the electric ones. So while we can't actually, as municipalities, lease police vehicles, and especially the nature of how police vehicles are used, we almost in a certain sense would be leasing them, and that we would only be the depreciation on those vehicles between buying them and then selling them would basically be about what we would be paying for a lease anyhow for those gas-powered vehicles. And by the end of 2025 at the latest, we would have an all-electric situation for the police department. In addition, looking at our comprehensive plan, something else the police department has committed to as part of this asking council for this investment. Our comprehensive plan talks about bike patrols and increasing their frequency, and the police department has also committed with a recommendation from our EAC to get an electric bike for the department, and they've committed not an electric motorcycle, that was a separate idea that had come up at one point, but an electric bicycle that they would use and would report on its usage to council as part of their monthly police reports, so that we could ensure, and so the mayor could ensure that it's being adequately used to meet our comp plan. So again, this will be all kind of more part of our bigger budget discussion, but essentially, let me get my memo open here. What myself and the police department are asking for in terms of ultimate costs when all this shakes out is for the 2022 budget, we're asking for an extra $67,000 towards this. We do have the leeway. When I did the treasurer's report earlier for finance administration, I'll admit this number, I actually jumped the gun a little bit, so I hope that doesn't bite me here at council tonight. We do have the capacity in the budget to absorb that cost. They would be asking for then for the 2023 budget, $53,000 and change, not only for a vehicle but also for an additional EV charger, which PHS has already been talking about. Given the usage the EV charger at the municipal lot already gets, and given the fact we would be adding municipal EVs that would need to use it as well, that would be part of that cost proposed for next year. And then finally, for the 2024 budget, a request for $65,000. So that is the ask to council, and by doing that, actually by the end of 2024, you would have a police department with not only functional vehicles, but electric vehicles, a charger to service them. And if for some reason, if the technology changed, or if for some reason we did not need electric vehicles in the police department anymore, we could always sell those as well and recoup, those investment costs.
All right. So are you going to show any reduction in the maintenance budget in the out years?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and actually that's a good point. I did not include that in these financial numbers, but absolutely, if we don't do this, I would probably have to budget another $25,000, $30,000 in maintenance for next year. Whereas if we did do this, I could probably drop that number down to, 5, maybe 10,000 if I wanted to be extra conservative.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that there's like not as many moving parts.
Right. Yeah, they don't require oil changes.
Right.
Yeah.
There's almost no maintenance.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but currently officers often have to jump the car before getting it started to go to an emergency. So for public safety, we need functional vehicles.
Mm-hmm. So we would have a total of three cars and the bike.
That's correct. And then the parking controller would have a vehicle.
Right.
So we'd have 3 patrol vehicles, the patrol bike, and the EV for the pressing controller and another charger.
Just real quick, what percentage of the time do we have 3 officers on duty at the same time?
I don't think that's an accurate question. I think the implication in that question is that why do we need 3 vehicles?
Yeah.
So the reason we need 3 vehicles, and the mayor might know better than me, but my understanding is to answer your original question and then provide the real answer. That would of course be 0% of the time. We do have 2 officers on shift from time to time, and you know, especially the vehicles we've had, we've needed multiple vehicles in the event that one fails in order to provide adequate public safety response. And the advice and feedback I've received from the police department is that they need 3 vehicles to to be able to ensure they can provide rapid response to public safety events.
Yeah. I guess I say that because if we are getting all new vehicles, the idea that, oh, well, in case one breaks down, may not be an issue nowadays. You know, if we're getting 2 new vehicles and a bike, which I was thrilled to hear Officer Belty say, yeah, an electric bike actually can be a supplemental. You want your primary officer in the car to supplemental it, maybe we could reconsider that third vehicle.
I would say it's not 0 that we use 3 vehicles during events, on the days when we have more staff working because we have more people in the borough. So Dickens Fest, 4th, Music Fest, days we have more people on duty. That's when you may need more than the typical amount of vehicles.
The other thing we do with the vehicles, as you may have noticed at special events, is both police and public works vehicles are used to block off, to serve as, road blockage signifiers.
And another reason another way vehicles are used, sometimes vehicles are placed permanently in a particular area of the borough so that as people are driving too fast, walk by, they see a vehicle, they slow down. It's used as a method to slow down.
That doesn't really work. But we should talk about that.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, I feel blindsided here, and that when PHS discussed this, that wasn't.
No. It wasn't intentional blindsiding. I was just, as you were talking about this, thinking, wait, why do we really need 3 brand new cars? Could we consider pausing one that the Chevy's going to take a while anyway. So,
well, they're electric vehicles and they have to be charged, and like while they're being charged, you can't drive them.
Right, we have 2 gas, 1 electric.
We're eventually going to end up with 3 electric.
Well, eventually, correct.
So the recommendation, was there a recommendation out of public health and safety to proceed with this?
There was.
Yeah.
We supported this.
Yeah. I'm not trying to blindside.
And that's fair. I mean, you have more time to digest information, questions come up.
Does anybody else want to raise any objections to this plan? All right. Seeing no other objections.
No. I really was just thinking out loud.
You can go ahead and.
So I would need actually a motion. Sorry. I would actually need a motion from Borough Council to make a budget adjustment for the 2022 budget to be able to be able to move forward with this plan as presented, and then as part of the 2023 budget, we'll then talk about whether we need additional investment at that time.
Okay. Anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. Any further discussion of this? All right, so we're going to be voting on amending the budget in order to purchase police vehicles as per the recommendations of the Public Health and Safety Plan. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. All right, that's 12B. We have nothing in old business. Committee updates. Finance Administration.
Well, my computer's dying, so I'm going to read this from my phone. We went over a lot of what we discussed in our FNA meeting, so I'm just going to talk about the things real briefly that folks probably need to know. The volunteer appreciation event date, I will get it to you by tomorrow. I just need to confirm with John and Samantha. It's not expected that, or the expectation is not that 100% of council comes, rather it's an opportunity for new volunteers and committee members to understand technology expectations, sunshine law expectations. PAC had some questions about how to do file share, an opportunity for those to be cleared up for our solicitor in office. We reviewed grants, schedule of bills, our insurance, which we talked about, the website redesign. The intern did finish an updated site map to better reflect our proposal, and Todd Rodstein is starting to collect some photos, so we should see those images up forthcoming. Something exciting Samantha did let us know is that we are going to have the ability via Square to collect electronic payments. We were paying $40 a month for a PayPal device that really is not easy to use and no one ever used. So thank you for making us modern. And we will see that draft budget on October 6th. We went through information for grants. We went through what has been applied for and what we will be going for. That list is online, and we talked about that earlier. So that's all we have for, I think, really FNA. Ira or Barbara, unless I'm forgetting anything. Samantha.
Just a change in time for the meetings.
Oh, thank you. And we will be meeting at 6:30 now instead of 6. Yep, thanks.
All right. So I got a note from Michelle that infrastructure did not meet last month. So she just wanted me to remind people of the date and time of the upcoming meeting, which I'm trying to find. I already know offhand.
I think it's before Tuesday.
It'll be September 27th at 1 p.m.
All right, so the next meeting of infrastructure, September 27th, 1 p.m.
But I don't know why she said we didn't meet, because we met on July 26th.
Right, we didn't meet in August.
That's true.
All right.
But I do have a short report, not about the infrastructure committee itself, although one of our groups that we work with. I went to a great meeting of the Parks and Rec board last night, and it's, a newly reconstituted with a new leader, Dennis Talon, and they are very positive about the idea about having an ad hoc committee to do a master park plan. And I guess I won't do a full report, but that's the highlight. And then I did want to just briefly say that I wanted to, Bill, if she's not here, I wanted to thank Michelle for everything she's done for the infrastructure committee. She's, just an amazing person. She's done so much. I will never be able to do as good a job as she did, but I will try.
Thank you. All right. Public health and safety.
Yeah, we met the first Friday of the month, and we, as a committee, developed a charge for the new PAC, the Police Advisory Committee. And then after our public health meeting, we were able to meet with the Police Advisory Committee to kind of orient them and welcome them to their new role. And they are going to schedule their first meeting, I think, within the next month. So we're very grateful to the 5 new members of the Police Advisory Committee. The mayor was able to join us, as well as Bob and Cindy. So it was a very good first meeting. And we also are working on the job description for the police chief. We had in the meeting a very good discussion with Officer Belfi about the electric vehicles, and I think we were all impressed with his research and leadership on this. We also had an extended discussion with the CCA working group, which is community choice aggregation. It's a project to kind of buy renewable electricity in bulk for all of the borough. And so we had a discussion with them, and I think the committee was favorably disposed. There were questions that the manager has, and so we're, it's a discussion at this point to see if we can move forward with that. And it's something I think we would be very excited about, but we do need to answer some questions. So I think that's most of it.
All right. Thank you, Rob. I'm very excited about that agreement. Hope we can move forward.
Yeah, I hope so.
Ad hoc parking.
Yes, we met this past Tuesday and discussed some of the issues that council raised at the August 18th business meeting around the committee's recommendations for changes to the residential parking for already regulated streets. I'm saying that because I've heard from some people that they thought that what we were proposing would apply to the entire borough, and it only applies to streets that already have regulations of the 2-hour zones on them. So just to clear up any confusion about that. But anyway, we discussed some of those issues. We need to continue discussing those. And so we'll be doing that at our next meeting. And we have decided to switch from our twice a month meetings, which we've been doing for almost a year now, to once a month. We're going to be meeting on the second Friday of every month at 8 a.m. So our next meeting is on October 14th. So.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. Does anyone have comments for the good of council? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to an executive session to discuss a personnel matter relating to a pay increase request from a borough employee, a real estate matter regarding the disposition of borough-owned property, not 201 Sabine, and a personnel matter relating to a hiring decision. And I believe we will be coming back because there's a potential resolution, right?
If council decides they want to approve the pay increase request, they would need to vote.
So we may be returning after the executive session. Okay. Thank you to members of the public if there are any. I don't think so.
Let me pause the recording.
All right, so we are not going to take any other action at this time. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, all those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.